Okay, we got her working. Okay, this is the power supply. Power supply is fully functional. I can key the relays. Okay, and the relay turns the oscillator on and off. It also turns. It also grounds the cathode of the output tubes. I have the output tube, one of the output tubes out right now. I'm not running the outputs. I'm just strictly running the oscillator unit that I showed you in past videos, using the power supply, using this key. Now, what I want to tell you what I discovered while working with the fact that when you put this oscillator module in, and you turn the power off, we don't want to light up on screen. All right, this unit here, you unplug the tube on the end, which would be the indicator tube, in order to use this. Well, I'm using 24 volts, so that means I have to have a tube in there or a resistor in order to light this one up. They're in series. One goes, you take that one out, this don't light up. All right, but while doing that, I noticed something. And what I noticed was the CQ magazine article, they have you wire all the filaments in parallel. Okay, and then you use this power supply. This is a very expensive lesson in life, this power supply. You go around and you read the purists and you realize what you've discovered. I was getting some squirrely voltage readings between these two tubes. Each one across each tube, they're identical tubes, they're across the main AC voltage, but they read different voltages. And like, how could two tubes that are in series have different voltages across them? Well, when you go down in and look at the schematic, you find out that on the filament of the oscillator tube and the indicator tube, the cathodes are tied to the filament. So right there, that's like a big red flag, a holy red flag. Why would they tie a filament to a cathode? Well, it's part of the biasing in the transmitter. Well, that right tells you right there, you don't want to light the tubes up with AC. Okay? Like the article. Put all the tubes in parallel, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I went looking, and I found an article by a guy, and he basically says, you want to run this transmitter with 24 volts DC. All right? And he's right, because the DC that goes to the filaments is also used as part of the biasing on the oscillator tube. And I'm like, son of a bitch, you know? And you get so many different accounts of this transmitter from so many people. That's because there's so many different ways to get this on the air. But which one of them are really correct? All right, and you got ones that say that there's too much TV interference from these things, and I'm getting closer and closer to really understanding. Now, what you want to do is run this transmitter original with a 24 volts DC supply on the filament, and then you want about 250 to 300 on the screen, and then 400 to 500 on the plate. Okay, the good articles are out there, and the poor articles, there's even a power supply even worse than this. This is regulated. You might have saw when I was keying it, the brightness of these two tubes change as they regulate, but they regulate the voltage to the oscillator. So when you turn the oscillator on and off using the key, using the relay in the transmitter, you don't get that much chirping. Okay, and that's because you're regulating the voltage, and that's really one of the cures. What makes it even better is in some of the articles they show you in the relay in the transmitter, you put a little switch across the contacts, so you can throw the switch and keep the oscillator on all the time, and then you just key the relay, which keys the cathodes of the output tubes. Okay, I've read a lot on this thing. I got a pretty good handle on it. And I'm going to tell you what Kenny Rogers says. You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. And that's what this article is. And I'm going to warn you, if you've been following this, to one of the two people, this is not a really good transmitter. Okay? From the position of a beginner. Okay? Because you're going to need that to really do it correctly. You're going to need to put some real money into it. The money you're going to have to put into this transmitter could buy you a transmitter, okay, that works correctly, and you don't have to build a power supply for it. Yeah, these things were $12.95, something like that, back of a magazine. And then nowadays you need this is almost $200 worth of stuff here, all right, to run it. And that's what you got to understand. You really want it? Okay, I had my command receivers. I have all kinds of them. And this is my favorite. This is an 80 meter. I use this for AM phone at night. And I thought it'd be nice to have a transmitter next to it. You know? And I noticed they're different heights. See, it's in the frame. They're different heights. They're meant to be on two different racks in the aircraft. So that whole idea, when I got it, I was like, there's not the same heights. But I kept going. I said, well, let's see what kind of a project I can make out of it. Now make sure the power is off. And the first part was you find out you can't use the transmitter unless you have an extra license with the VFO in it. Okay, you're not allowed to use the VFO. So you have to make a crystal controlled oscillator that plugs in. Of course, it's really made to plug into the transmitter that's been converted to 12 volt filaments. And I'm going to tell you again, it's a bodge job, okay? There are articles, if you really, really dig on this, and then the guy put his name on it too, and he really spells it out. When you want this to work really correctly, he tells you what voltage you really need at what currents, okay? These articles, they'll get you on the air, okay? But it wasn't the best, okay? And you have to, in order to learn in life, you have to do some experience. You know, I could read all the articles in the world. I can go on the net and spout it all out. But basically, when you actually own the equipment and you really work on it, you know, and you actually build stuff, you realize that you haven't been misled. They've lied to you through omission. No one says, you know, when you use AC voltage on the filaments for the oscillator, you're messing up the bias. No one says that. That's lying through omission. All right. Now, if you go through the command set conversion book, if you scroll down through and look at the different conversions, one of them says use 12 volts on the oscillator for the filament. The rest of the filaments in the transmitter, you can use the AC. So you wire this transmitter, you rewire it up, and all the tubes work on 12 volts, 12.6 volts AC, except the oscillator, and you run that on DC voltage. And that's the cheap way to get around the fact that you're not running the filaments on 24 volts DC. And it gets very confusing. I'm like, one minute I'm saying 24 volts DC, next minute I'm saying 12.6 volts AC. 12.6 volt AC is when the set's been converted to one of the bodged articles. Okay, 24 volts DC you're going to need is if you want to run it like the aircraft. So you have you got to have 24 volts to 28 volts DC to light the filaments and correctly bias the oscillator. And then you're going to need the oscillator, the filaments, 24 volts DC. Then the oscillator needs 250 to 300 volts to run the oscillator, and then the screen voltage for the output tubes is 275 to 300, and then 400 to 500 volts for the plates. And that's what you're going to have. It's going to be very confusing at first until you do a lot of reading and it all starts to soak in, and then you realize if you've gone down the path of one of these bodged articles, you're going to have problems with the transmitter. Okay, and that's what happened to this poor thing. And you know, I had some complaints about the command receivers, what people did to them. You know, spraying stuff with deox and you know, the way they changed the capacitors inside. I showed you all that. I went through that. This has a lot of bodged. There's a lot of bodged receivers out there, and there's a lot of bad articles. Okay, and that's the whole thing about command sets. And there's some people that have very fond feelings for command stuff because maybe they ran it the right way. I did a lot of reading, and I say it's like Kenny Rogers says, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. I think that's it. All right, that's it.